A millionaire shocks the world by ditching his fiancée the day before their wedding to marry a beggar he met on the street. But what could drive him to make a decision so explosive it might ruin his life forever? Before we dive into the story, share in the comments where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Nathan Price stood at his office window, 40 stories above Manhattan, holding a phone that threatened to shatter in his grip. The message glowing on the screen was meant for someone else, a steamy exchange between his fiancée Victoria and his best man. 3 days before what society magazines had dubbed the wedding of the decade, his perfect world crumbled with each scroll of his thumb. The irony wasn't lost on him. Nathan Price, the billionaire who'd built an empire by predicting every market move, hadn't seen the betrayal unfolding in his own home. He glanced at the wedding invitation on his desk, its gold leaf lettering catching the late afternoon sun. Victoria Adams and Nathan Price, it proclaimed in elegant script. Now, those names felt like a mockery of everything he'd believed in. His office door opened without a knock. Only one person had that privilege. Victoria sauntered in, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. She looked flawless as always, her red lips curved in a practiced smile that had graced countless magazine covers. "Darling, the wedding planner needs your final approval on—" She stopped mid-sentence, noticing his expression. "What's wrong?" Nathan held up the phone, his voice deadly calm. "Interesting conversation you've been having with James." The color drained from Victoria's face, but only for a moment. Then something shifted in her eyes. Not guilt, but almost amusement. "Oh, Nathan," she sighed, settling into one of his leather chairs. "Did you really think this was about love?" "Get out," he whispered. She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "And cancel the wedding? Please, you won't do that to yourself. Your reputation, your shareholders, they're expecting a power couple. You're too weak to disappoint them." Nathan's fingers tightened around the phone. "Watch me." Victoria stood, smoothing her designer dress. "You need me, Nathan. Without me, you're just another rich man who couldn't keep a woman interested. Go ahead, cancel everything. But remember, people will whisper that you weren't man enough to keep me." Something snapped inside Nathan. Years of calculated control evaporated in an instant. "I would marry a beggar before I'd marry you." Victoria's smile faltered for the first time. "Careful with your threats, darling. They might come back to haunt you." After she left, Nathan stood motionless, her words echoing in his head. "You're too weak." The phrase burned through him like acid, awakening something dark and desperate. He grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. The city lights blurred past his car window as his driver navigated through Manhattan's evening traffic. Nathan's mind raced with possibilities, each more outrageous than the last. He needed to prove Victoria wrong, to show her that she hadn't broken him. Then he saw her. Under the harsh glare of a streetlight, a woman sat huddled on a bench, her blonde hair tangled and dirty, but still catching the light. She wasn't like the other homeless people Nathan usually ignored. There was something in her posture, a quiet dignity that even hardship hadn't erased. "Stop the car," Nathan commanded. As he approached her, she looked up. Despite the grime on her face, her blue eyes were startlingly clear and intelligent. She didn't flinch or ask for money. She simply watched him, waiting. "What's your name?" Nathan asked. "Emily," she replied, her voice hoarse but steady. "Emily Carter." Nathan studied her for a moment, an impossible idea taking shape in his mind. It was crazy, reckless, and potentially ruinous. It was exactly what he needed. "Emily," he said, "I have a proposition for you, one that could change both our lives." She raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident in her gaze. "I'm listening." Nathan took a deep breath, knowing his next words would set something unstoppable in motion. "Marry me." Emily's laugh was harsh, echoing off the brick walls of the empty street. Is this some kind of joke? "I'm completely serious," Nathan replied, his expression unwavering. "One day of marriage. In return, I'll give you enough money to start a new life, anywhere you want." Emily stood, and despite her ragged clothes there was steel in her spine. "Why me?" "Because you're perfect," Nathan said, his eyes calculating. "No connections, no social media presence. You're a ghost in the system." "And that's exactly what you need, isn't it?" Emily's voice carried a bitter edge. "Someone desperate enough to be your puppet." Nathan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Think about it, Emily. One day of playing a role and you'll never have to sleep on a bench again." The silence between them felt electric. Emily's mind raced with possibilities and warnings. What's the catch? Before we find out how Emily's decision changes everything, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It costs you nothing, but for us, especially in these early days, it means the world. Let's continue with what happens next. The catch is that for the next 24 hours, you'll need to convince the world you're madly in love with me. We're having a wedding tomorrow evening. Emily's eyes widened. Tomorrow? That's impossible. "Nothing's impossible with enough money," Nathan replied, pulling out his phone. "My team can transform you by morning. Hair, makeup, wardrobe, everything." A cold breeze whipped through the street, and Emily wrapped her thin jacket tighter around herself. The offer dangled before her like a lifeline, but she'd learned the hard way that lifelines often turned into nooses. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. Something dark flickered across Nathan's face. "Let's just say I'm proving a point." "To whom?" "That doesn't concern you." He held out his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Emily stared at his outstretched hand, remembering all the nights she'd gone hungry, all the doors that had closed in her face. One day of pretense for a chance at a real future. It seemed too good to be true, because it probably was. But what choice did she have? "Deal," she said, taking his hand. The transformation began immediately. A sleek black car whisked them to Nathan's penthouse where a team of stylists waited. As they led Emily toward the bathroom, she caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror. Dirty, disheveled, broken. By this time tomorrow, that woman would be gone. "Wait," Emily called out as Nathan turned to leave. "What happens after tomorrow, when everyone asks about our whirlwind romance?" Nathan paused at the door, his smile cold. "We'll tell them it was love at first sight. The lonely billionaire and the beautiful stranger who stole his heart. People love fairy tales, Emily. They'll believe what they want to believe." As the bathroom door closed behind her and hot water began to steam the mirrors, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a deal with the devil. But there was something else nagging at her. Something in Nathan's eyes when he'd mentioned love. Behind his confident facade, she'd glimpsed a wound still bleeding. The question was, would his healing come at the cost of her destruction? The stylists worked through the night, erasing every trace of Emily's life on the streets. Each stroke of the brush, every snip of scissors felt like pieces of her identity falling away. The woman emerging in the mirror was a stranger, elegant, polished, unrecognizable. "Perfect," the lead stylist murmured, adjusting Emily's now gleaming hair. "Mr. Price will be pleased." Those words sent a chill down Emily's spine. She wasn't a person to them, just another project, another item on Nathan Price's endless list of possessions to perfect. Dawn broke over the city as Emily stood in what would be her room for the night. The space was bigger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, with views that stretched across Central Park. Designer clothes filled the closet. All in her size, all carefully selected to create the illusion of old money and refined taste. A knock at the door made her jump. Nathan entered, looking fresh despite the sleepless night. His eyes swept over her transformation with clinical precision. "Good," he said simply. "You'll need to memorize these." He handed her a thick folder. "Your background story, your preferences, our courtship details. Learn them all by tonight." Emily flipped through the pages, her heart sinking. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I leave nothing to chance." He checked his watch. "The wedding is at 7. Reporters will start arriving at 5 for pre-ceremony interviews. Remember, let me guess, Emily cut in, her voice sharp. Smile, look devoted, and keep my mouth shut unless spoken to? Nathan's expression hardened. This isn't a game, Emily. One wrong word, one slip in your story, and everything falls apart. Everything falls apart for you, you mean, Emily replied. What happens to me when this is over? When people start asking questions? You'll be well compensated for your discretion. He moved toward the door. Besides, after tomorrow, you can disappear to anywhere in the world. Isn't that what you wanted? As the door closed behind him, Emily sank onto the bed, her fingers tracing the fabric of her new silk robe. She'd dreamed of escape for so long, but not like this, not as someone's carefully crafted lie. The day passed in a blur of preparations. Emily memorized her new life story between fittings and makeup tests. Born in Seattle, educated in Europe, working in art restoration, each detail carefully chosen to explain her lack of digital footprint and social connections. But as evening approached and she slipped into the custom wedding gown that had appeared as if by magic, Emily caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was beautiful, poised, and completely hollow, just like the man she was about to marry. That's when she saw it, a small news alert on her new phone. The headline made her blood run cold. Society, wedding shock. Price Adams nuptials canceled amid cheating scandal. Suddenly, Nathan's desperate plan made terrible sense. This wasn't about love or even convenience. It was about revenge. And Emily was nothing more than his weapon of choice. Camera flashes exploded like lightning as Emily stepped into the church. The gown's train whispered across marble floors that had seen generations of society weddings. Every eye was on her, searching, judging, wondering who this mystery woman was who had seemingly enchanted New York's most eligible bachelor overnight. Nathan waited at the altar, playing his part perfectly. His smile held just the right mix of love and triumph. But Emily saw something else in his eyes as she approached, a flash of satisfaction that made her skin crawl. She was his victory lap, his elaborate middle finger to the woman who had humiliated him. "You look beautiful," he whispered as she reached him, loud enough for the front rows to hear. Emily smiled back, her face aching from holding the expression. "You look pleased with yourself." His fingers tightened around hers in warning, but before he could respond, the ceremony began. The priest's words washed over them like a tide of hollow promises. Emily heard herself say, "I do," watched herself slide a ring onto Nathan's finger. It felt like watching a play where she'd been cast without learning her lines. Then Nathan kissed her, a perfect, camera-ready kiss that meant nothing and cost everything. The reception was a blur of faces and forced laughter. Emily danced with her new husband, feeling the stares of hundreds of guests burning into her back. She caught snippets of whispered conversations. Never even heard of her. What happened to Victoria? Must be pregnant. But it was the arrival of an uninvited guest that shattered the carefully choreographed evening. Victoria Adams swept into the ballroom like a storm front, her red dress a slash of blood against the cream and gold decor. The room fell silent as she approached the head table, her smile sharp as a blade. "Nathan, darling," she purred, ignoring Emily completely. "What a lovely surprise." Nathan's arm snaked around Emily's waist, pulling her closer. "Victoria, I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list." "Oh, I wouldn't miss this for the world." Victoria's eyes finally landed on Emily, dissecting her with a single glance. "Tell me, where did you find such a convenient replacement? She's almost believable." Emily felt Nathan tense beside her, saw the muscle jumping in his jaw, but before he could respond, she found herself standing. "I found him, actually," Emily heard herself say, her voice carrying across the hushed room. "Sometimes the best things in life come when you're not looking for them. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Victoria?" A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Victoria's perfect smile cracked just slightly at the edges. How? Sweet, Victoria managed, but her composure was slipping. I do hope you know what you're getting into, dear. Nathan can be quite demanding when things don't go his way. That's enough, Nathan cut in. But Emily wasn't finished. Thank you for your concern, she said, meeting Victoria's gaze steadily. But I think we both know why you're really here, and you're right, it is quite a surprise, just not the one you were hoping for. Victoria's face flushed red. Without another word, she turned and stalked out of the ballroom, leaving a wake of whispers behind her. Emily sat down slowly, her hands shaking under the tablecloth. Nathan leaned close, his lips near her ear. That wasn't part of the script, he murmured. Neither was she. You could have ruined everything. Emily turned to face him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. No, I just saved your performance. A real wife would never let another woman speak to her husband that way. I made it believable. Something shifted in Nathan's expression. Surprise, respect, or perhaps something darker. But before he could respond, a wave of guests descended on their table, eager to congratulate the happy couple. As Emily smiled and nodded through another round of well wishes, she felt Nathan's gaze on her. She'd gone off script, shown that she wasn't just a puppet on his strings. The question was, would he see it as an asset or a threat? Either way, she had just changed the rules of their arrangement, and judging by the calculating look in Nathan's eyes, he knew it too. The evening wore on, a glittering carousel of champagne toasts and carefully orchestrated moments. Emily played her part with unexpected grace, charming Nathan's business associates and society friends with a warmth that seemed too genuine to be fake. But beneath her smile, her mind raced. Every laugh, every touch between them added another layer to a lie that was becoming dangerously comfortable. Later, during a quiet moment between dances, Emily found herself alone on the terrace. The city lights sparkled below, a sea of possibilities she could never quite reach. The cool night air helped clear her head, but it couldn't silence the voice warning her that she was in over her depth. Quite a performance in there. Emily turned to find Nathan leaning against the doorway, his bow tie loosened just enough to suggest the lateness of the hour. I learned from the best, she replied. You've been performing all night. He crossed to the railing, standing close enough that any watching eyes would see an intimate moment between newlyweds. You're more clever than I anticipated. Is that a compliment or a concern? Both. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the shadows. You handled Victoria perfectly. Too perfectly. Almost as if you understood exactly what she was trying to do. Emily met his gaze steadily. Women like her aren't hard to read. They need an audience for their pain. You took that away from her. And you think you understand me that well too? I understand enough. Emily gestured at the party behind them. All this, the elaborate revenge, the perfect bride appearing out of nowhere, it's not about love or even reputation. It's about control. You needed to prove that you could orchestrate everything, right down to manufacturing a wife. Nathan's hand closed over hers on the railing, a gesture that looked loving but felt like a warning. Be careful, Emily. Don't mistake our arrangement for something it's not. Oh, I know exactly what this is, she replied softly. The question is, do you? Before he could respond, a photographer spotted them and hurried over. Mr. and Mrs. Price, could we get a few shots of the happy couple? Nathan's public smile snapped back into place as he pulled Emily close. Of course. The camera flashed, capturing what looked like a perfect moment. The billionaire and his bride silhouetted against the city lights. But Emily felt the tension in Nathan's arm around her waist, the slight tremor in his fingers that suggested she'd struck a nerve. As they returned to the reception, Emily caught their reflection in the ballroom's massive windows. They looked perfect together, like something out of a fairy tale. But fairy tales, she remembered, often had darker meanings hidden beneath their shining surface. She'd survived this long by reading people, by understanding the currents of power and desperation that moved beneath polite society. Nathan Price might think he held all the cards, but Emily had learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous player was the one with nothing left to lose. The question was, in this game they'd started, who would lose themselves first? Morning crept into the penthouse like an unwelcome guest. Emily woke in the massive guest suite, momentarily disoriented by the luxury surrounding her. The events of the previous night felt like a dream, or perhaps a carefully orchestrated illusion. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of Anna, the housekeeper Nathan had assigned to her. "Good morning, Mrs. Price. Your schedule for today has been arranged." Emily flinched at the name. "Schedule?" "Mr. Price insists you begin your training immediately." Anna laid out a designer outfit on the bed. "The media will be watching. Everything must be perfect." Perfect. The word was beginning to sound like a prison sentence. Downstairs, Nathan sat at the breakfast table, already impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. Multiple tablets surrounded his coffee cup, each displaying a different news site. All of them featured photos from the wedding. "We made quite an impression," he said without looking up. "The mysterious art restorer who captured New York's most eligible bachelor. People are intrigued." "And Victoria?" His jaw tightened. Notably silent. For now. Emily sank into the chair across from him, studying the man who was now, at least on paper, her husband. In the morning light she caught glimpses of something beneath his controlled exterior. Exhaustion, perhaps, or a deeper unease. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we convince the world." He finally met her gaze. "For the next few weeks you'll be in the spotlight. Every move, every word will be scrutinized. You'll need extensive training, etiquette, wine appreciation, art history." "I thought this was a one-day deal," Emily cut in. "Plans change." Nathan's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "The media attention is too intense for a quick disappearance. It would raise questions." Emily felt the walls closing in. "How long?" "A month, maybe 2, long enough to make our story believable." He slid a black credit card across the table. "Your new life begins today. Don't disappoint me." The days that followed were a blur of lessons and carefully staged public appearances. Emily learned to navigate wine lists at Michelin-starred restaurants, to discuss contemporary art with gallery owners, to smile for paparazzi without looking desperate for attention. But it was the quiet moments that proved most dangerous. One evening, after a particularly exhausting charity gala, Emily found Nathan in his home office. He sat in the dark, a glass of whiskey untouched before him, staring at an old photograph. "Your brother?" she asked, recognizing the family resemblance in the smiling young man. Nathan started, quickly putting the photo away. "You should be in bed." "So should you." Emily moved closer, drawn by the rare crack in his armor. "What happened to him?" "Car accident, 10 years ago." Nathan's voice was flat. He was the good one, the kind one. Everyone loved Michael. "Including Victoria?" His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What do you know about that?" "Nothing," Emily said softly, "but I see how it haunts you both. The way she looks at you sometimes, like she's seeing a ghost." Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're imagining things." But Emily had seen enough. The pieces were falling into place. Victoria's bitterness, Nathan's desperate need for control, the shadow of a dead brother hanging over them both. "She loved him first, didn't she?" Emily pressed. "Before you." Nathan's glass shattered against the wall, sending whiskey and crystal raining onto the carpet. The sound echoed through the quiet apartment like a gunshot. "Get out," he whispered. But as Emily turned to leave, she caught his reflection in the window. A man drowning in secrets, using revenge to breathe. What she didn't expect was how much she suddenly wanted to save him. That night marked a shift in their carefully constructed facade. Nathan began avoiding the penthouse, throwing himself into work and leaving Emily to navigate her new life alone. But his absence spoke volumes. louder than any shattered glass or angry words. At a charity luncheon the following week, Emily found herself seated next to Grace Henderson, an elderly socialite known for her sharp tongue and sharper insights. "You're different," Grace declared, studying Emily over her champagne. "Not like the usual gold diggers who chase men like Nathan." "I'm not chasing anything," Emily replied. "No," Grace mused. "You're running from something, just like him." Before Emily could respond, her phone buzzed. A message from Victoria. "Coffee tomorrow? Just us girls? There's so much about Nathan you should know." Emily's finger hovered over the reply button, but a memory stopped her. Nathan's face in the darkness of his office, the weight of unspoken grief. She deleted the message. That evening, she found herself in Nathan's office again, drawn by an impulse she couldn't explain. The photograph of Michael was still in his desk drawer, along with a stack of old newspapers. The headlines told a story Nathan had never shared. "Tragic accident claims rising star." Michael Price, philanthropist and heir, dead at 26 inches. Grieving fiancée Victoria Adams speaks out. Emily's hands trembled as she read. Michael had been everything Nathan wasn't. Warm, generous, beloved by all. His death had left a void that Nathan had tried to fill, including taking his brother's place in Victoria's life. Finding anything interesting? Emily whirled to find Nathan in the doorway, his expression dangerously calm. "You should have told me," she said quietly. "Why? So you could pity me?" He crossed the room, reaching past her to snatch the papers away. Poor Nathan. Always second best, even in revenge. "This isn't about pity." Emily stood her ground. "It's about understanding why you're so determined to destroy yourself along with Victoria. You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Emily stepped closer. "You're punishing yourself as much as her. Every time you look at me dressed up in these designer clothes playing this perfect wife, you're reminded that none of it is real, just like what you had with Victoria." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "Get out." "No." Emily's voice was firm. "You're not the only one who's lost everything, Nathan. The difference is I'm not using my pain to hurt others." "Then what are you using it for?" he challenged. "Why are you really here, Emily? Because it's not just about the money anymore, is it?" The question hung between them like a live wire. Emily felt the crackle of something dangerous, not anger or revenge, but something far more terrifying. Understanding. "I'm here," she said slowly, "because somewhere beneath all this perfection and control, there's a man worth saving." Nathan's laugh was bitter. "And you think you're the one to save me?" "No." Emily moved toward the door. "I think you need to save yourself. But first, you need to decide what's more important, your revenge or your chance at something real." She left him standing in his office, surrounded by the ghosts of his past. But as she walked away, Emily realized she was no longer just playing a part. Somewhere between the lies and the pain, she'd begun to care about the broken man behind the billion-dollar facade, and that, she knew, would be their undoing. The truth exploded like a bomb at breakfast. Emily was sipping her coffee when Anna rushed in, her normally composed face flushed with panic. "Mrs. Price, you need to see this." The morning news was already pulled up on a tablet. Emily's heart stopped as she read the headline. "Price marriage exposed, billionaire's homeless bride revealed." Below was a photo of her from before, huddled on her bench, wrapped in her old jacket. The article detailed everything. Her background, her homelessness, even the exact spot where Nathan had found her. Anonymous sources quoted Nathan's vow to marry a beggar before accepting Victoria's betrayal. Emily's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. The sound seemed to echo through the silent penthouse like a gunshot. Nathan. His name fell from her lips like a prayer or a curse. But he was already there, standing in the doorway. His face was ashen, his phone buzzing constantly in his hand. "It was Victoria," he said, his voice hollow. "She had us followed that night. She's been waiting for the perfect moment to release it." Emily stood slowly, her legs trembling. Did you know that she might do this? Emily, did you know? His silence was answer enough. You knew, she whispered. You knew she would expose me, humiliate me. That was a part of your plan all along, wasn't it? The perfect revenge. Let Victoria think she had the upper hand, then show everyone that even a homeless woman could replace her. It wasn't like that. Nathan moved toward her, but Emily backed away. Then what was it like? Her voice cracked. Because from where I'm standing, you used me just like you used her. The only difference is I was desperate enough to let you. Everything I promised you still stands, Nathan said quickly. The money, the new life. I don't want your money. Emily's shout surprised them both. I wanted. She stopped, choking on words she couldn't say. Wanted what? To believe that somewhere under all this manipulation and revenge there was something real. That the man I saw in your office that night, the one drowning in grief and guilt, that he was worth saving. Nathan's face changed, something raw and vulnerable breaking through his careful mask. Emily, please. No. She held up her hand. You got what you wanted, Nathan. Victoria's humiliated, your revenge is complete. The story of the billionaire and the beggar will follow her forever. Emily's laugh was bitter. I'm sure the press will love that angle. She turned toward the stairs, her movements mechanical. I'll pack my things. Where will you go? Emily paused, not turning around. Back to my bench, I suppose. At least there I knew exactly what I was worth. But as she reached the top of the stairs, Nathan's voice stopped her. I see you. The words were so quiet she almost missed them. Emily turned slowly, and Nathan stood at the bottom of the stairs looking more undone than she'd ever seen him. That night in my office, when you talked about Michael, about Victoria, you saw me. Not the billionaire, not the revenge plot. Just me. His voice cracked. No one's done that since Michael died. Emily felt tears burning behind her eyes. And now? Now I'm standing here, watching the only real thing in my life walk away. He took a step up the stairs. Stay. Not for the plan, not for revenge. Stay because... A sharp knock at the door cut him off. Through the frosted glass they could see the shapes of reporters and cameras. The real world was crashing in, and with it the weight of their choices. Emily met Nathan's eyes one last time. Because what? His answer would change everything. The pounding on the door grew louder, but time seemed to stand still in the stairwell. Nathan took another step up, then another, his eyes never leaving Emily's. Stay, because I love you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and terrifying in their simplicity. Emily's breath caught. You don't mean that. You can't. Can't I? He was halfway up the stairs now. Do you know what scared me most these past weeks? Not Victoria's schemes, not the media attention. It was watching you become real to me, watching you tear down every wall I'd built. More banging at the door. Cameras flashed through the glass. Mr. Price, comment on your arranged marriage? Is it true she was homeless? Was this all revenge against Victoria Adams? Nathan ignored them all, taking another step. I thought I was so clever, orchestrating this perfect revenge. But somewhere between the lies and the pretense, you saw through me. You made me face truths I'd been running from for years. Nathan, Emily's voice wavered. I've been hiding behind Michael's death, using it as an excuse to keep everyone at arm's length. Victoria knew that. It's why she could manipulate me for so long. He was just 3 steps below her now. But you? You walked right past my defenses. You saw my pain, and instead of using it against me, you showed me how to face it. The door buzzed. Someone had gotten into the building. Voices echoed in the lobby below. We don't have much time, Emily whispered. Then let me say this quickly. Nathan climbed the final steps until they were face to face. Yes, this started as revenge. Yes, I used you. But somewhere along the way the act became real. The way you challenge me, the way you see through my masks, it terrifies me. And that terror, he touched her cheek gently. That's how I know this is real. Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks. "How can I believe you? After everything?" "Because I'm giving you a choice." He stepped back, creating space between them. "The elevator in my office leads to the private garage. There's a car waiting. You can leave right now. Disappear before the press gets up here. I'll handle everything." Emily stared at him, understanding dawning. "You're letting me go?" "I'm choosing you over revenge." His voice was rough with emotion. "If you stay, we face this together. No more schemes, no more masks. Just us, figuring out what's real." The sound of footsteps on the stairs below grew closer. "And if I go?" Emily asked softly. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I lost something real because I was too caught up in revenge to see it." The footsteps were almost there. Camera lights illuminated the stairwell. Emily looked at Nathan, really looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, the vulnerability he'd hidden for so long. She saw the man who'd lost his brother, who'd tried to fill that void with perfection and control. And she saw something else. Hope. The first reporter rounded the corner, camera raised. Emily made her choice. Emily reached for Nathan's hand. The camera flashes exploded around them, capturing the moment in stark bursts of light. But Emily's eyes never left Nathan's face, watching as understanding dawned in his expression. "Mr. Price, is it true you married a homeless woman? Was this all an elaborate scheme? Emily, did he pay you to marry him?" The questions crashed against them like waves, but Nathan's grip on her hand remained steady. When he spoke, his voice carried across the chaos with calm authority. "My wife and I have a statement to make." The reporters fell silent, cameras still rolling. Emily felt Nathan's thumb brush across her knuckles, a small gesture of support, of solidarity. "Yes, I met Emily when she was homeless," Nathan continued. "Yes, our marriage began as something unconventional. But life has a way of surprising you, especially when you're busy making other plans." He turned to Emily, his eyes soft with an emotion she'd never seen before. "Sometimes you find truth in the midst of lies. Sometimes you find love when you're looking for revenge." A reporter pushed forward. "Are you saying this wasn't about Victoria Adams?" "This stopped being about Victoria a long time ago," Emily spoke up, her voice clear and strong. "Sometimes the story you think you're telling isn't the one that needs to be heard." She faced the cameras directly, drawing strength from Nathan's presence beside her. "Yes, I was homeless. I lost everything. My job, my home, my dignity. But standing here now, I want to tell a different story. Not about revenge or scandal, but about second chances." Nathan's hand tightened around hers. "About redemption," he added softly. "Is this some kind of publicity stunt?" someone called out. "No," Emily replied. "This is about two broken people who found each other in the darkness, who chose to step into the light together." Nathan turned to face the press, his businessman's mask replaced by something more genuine. "My brother Michael used to say that true character isn't about how you handle success, but how you face your failures. I've spent years running from mine." He looked at Emily. "Until someone brave enough to live without masks showed me how to stop running." The questions continued, but they felt distant now, like rain against a window. Emily saw tears in Nathan's eyes, not the carefully orchestrated emotion she'd witnessed at their wedding, but something raw and real. "What happens now?" a reporter asked. Nathan's smile was gentle as he looked at his wife. "Now we write our own story." Later that evening, after the reporters had gone and the dust had begun to settle, Emily and Nathan stood on their terrace. The city lights sparkled below, but neither was looking at the view. "I meant what I said," Nathan murmured, "about writing our own story." Emily turned to face him. "What kind of story did you have in mind? One that starts with truth." He took both her hands in his. "I'm not perfect, Emily. I'm broken and flawed and still learning how to be real, but if you're willing to be patient—" "I'm not perfect either," she reminded him. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe we stop trying to be perfect and just try to be better. Together." Nathan touched her cheek, his hand trembling slightly. "I love you," he whispered. "Not the story, not the revenge plot, just you." Emily leaned into his touch, letting tears fall freely. "I love you too, the real you, scars and all." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the first snow of winter began to fall. Soft flakes danced around them, transforming the city into something magical and new. Just like them, Emily thought. Something real emerging from something fabricated, something beautiful, born from pain. They had started as characters in a revenge plot, but they would continue as authors of their own story. And this time, every word would be true. 6 months later, Emily stood in front of a different crowd. Not reporters this time, but homeless men and women at the opening of the Price Foundation's first transitional housing center. Her hands shook slightly as she cut the ribbon, but her voice was steady as she addressed the gathering. "When I was on the streets, the hardest part wasn't the cold or the hunger," she said. "It was feeling invisible, like you could disappear and no one would notice." She caught Nathan's eye in the crowd. "But someone noticed me. And now, we want to notice you." The center was just the beginning. What had started as a revenge plot had transformed into a mission. Emily and Nathan worked side by side, using their story to shine a light on those society preferred to ignore. Victoria had tried to destroy them with the truth, never expecting they would embrace it. Her final attempt at revenge had backfired spectacularly. The last they'd heard, she'd left New York for Europe, her influence diminished by her own bitterness. One evening, after a particularly successful fundraiser, Nathan found Emily in his office. Their office now. She was looking at Michael's photograph, which had found a permanent home on the desk. "He would have liked you," Nathan said, wrapping his arms around her waist. Emily leaned back against him. "Because I'm helping people." "Because you helped me." He kissed her temple. "You know, I used to think loving someone meant trying to be perfect. Michael never bought into that. He lived authentically, flaws and all." "Like we're learning to do?" "Exactly like that." Their reflection in the window caught Emily's eye. No longer the polished society couple from their wedding photos, but something more real. Nathan's tie was loosened, her hair slightly messy from the long day. They looked lived in, comfortable, true. A soft knock at the door announced Anna's presence. "Mrs. Price, your guests for dinner have arrived." Emily smiled at the title now. It no longer felt like a costume she was wearing, but a part of who she'd become. Not because of the name or the status, but because of the man who shared it with her. They headed downstairs to greet their guests. Other couples working in charitable causes, people focused on making real change. No society photographers, no fake smiles, just authentic connections. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the same stairs where they'd faced their truth 6 months ago, Nathan pulled Emily close. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For showing me that sometimes the best stories aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that find us when we're brave enough to be real." Emily kissed him softly. No cameras around to capture the moment. This was just for them, a quiet acknowledgement of how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. Their story wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale of princes and happy endings. It was messy and complicated and beautiful in its truth. A story of two people who found love in the midst of lies, who chose authenticity over perfection, who learned that sometimes the longest journey isn't the one from poverty to wealth, but from masks to truth. And that, Emily knew, was the greatest revenge of all: living well, loving deeply, and helping others find their way out of the darkness. Because sometimes the most unexpected choices lead to the most profound transformations. Remember, it's not where you start, but the courage to change that defines your story. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to keep up with all our stories, and be sure to check out more emotional stories by clicking here on the end screen.